The Valthari Empire had existed for 300 years. It had swallowed 47 star systems. It had broken the will of kings, dissolved the governments of ancient civilizations, and turned proud warrior races into quiet, obedient servants. It had done all of this without ever losing a single major war. In 3 centuries of dominance, it had never once been made to feel afraid. So when the Empire sent its compliance notice to Earth, no one expected any trouble. The notice was simple. The Valthari wanted 3 of humanity's outer colony worlds, not because they needed them badly, but because those worlds sat in a stretch of space the Empire wished to control. Humanity had only been traveling between stars for 11 years. They were new. They were small. They were, by every measure the Empire used, insignificant. The compliance notice was not really a request. It was a formality. A piece of paper slid across a table to a species that had no real choice but to sign it. The Grand Conclave was held aboard the Imperial Station above Corveth Prime, a massive gas giant in the heart of Valthari territory. The station was enormous, bigger than some moons. Its halls were lined with dark stone, carved by the hands of 10 different conquered species. Tall windows looked out over the swirling storms of the planet below. Every corridor, every chamber, every chair, in every room, had been designed to make visitors feel small. It was architecture, built with purpose. The purpose was power. On the day of the meeting, High Arbiter Solvan arrived with a full council of 12 Valthari lords. They wore their formal robes, deep violet trimmed with silver thread, a color that lesser species were forbidden from using. They had advisors, translators, military attachés, and 2 armed guards standing at every door. Solvan himself was tall, even by Valthari standards. His skin was pale gray, his eyes a flat, silver color, and he moved through rooms the way most people moved, through spaces they owned slowly, without urgency, without any expectation of being challenged. He had reviewed the file on humanity the night before. It was a thin file. 11 years of FTL travel, a handful of colony worlds, a small defensive fleet with weapons that Valthari engineers rated as elementary. No recorded wars with any established interstellar power. The psychological profile at the back of the file noted that humans were emotionally volatile, tribalistic, and poorly suited for interstellar diplomacy. Solvan had closed the file and gone to sleep without concern. He expected a group of nervous diplomats. He expected apologies and careful language, and the familiar sight of a young species trying very hard not to offend. He did not expect Elira Voss. She walked into the conclave chamber alone. No escort, no bodyguards, no aide carrying her documents. She wore plain civilian clothes, dark trousers, a gray jacket, simple boots. She carried a small leather satchel over one shoulder. She looked like someone who had come to attend a routine meeting. She did not look around at the enormous chamber. She did not look up at the vaulted ceiling, or the tall windows, or the 12 robed lords seated at the curved table in front of her. She walked to the single chair that had been placed on the human side of the table, notably smaller than the Valthari chairs, placed lower to the ground, another deliberate architectural choice, and she sat down. She put her satchel on the table. She did not open it. High Arbiter Solvan studied her for a moment. She was of medium height for a human, dark hair cut short, brown eyes that were calm in a way he found, without being able to explain why, slightly unusual. She appeared to be somewhere in her middle years. Her expression was neutral, not nervous, not aggressive, just still. Solvan opened the proceedings in the standard imperial fashion. He welcomed the human representative. He explained, in polite but clear terms, the nature of the compliance notice. He outlined the 3 colony worlds being requested. He described the process by which they would be transferred to imperial administration. He spoke for nearly 10 minutes. His tone was generous, the tone of someone explaining something obvious to someone who needed patience. When he finished, there was a short silence. Elira Voss nodded slowly. She looked down at the table for a moment, as if thinking about something. Then she looked up. "Before we go further," she said, "I'd like to understand something." Solvan tilted his head slightly. "You may ask." Which one of you gave the order to bomb Kepler's landing? The room went quiet. It was a different kind of quiet than the polite silence between sentences. It was the quiet that fills a space when something unexpected has been dropped into the middle of it. Several of the Veilthari lords exchanged glances. One of the military attachés standing near the wall shifted his weight. Solvan's expression did not change, but something behind his silver eyes adjusted a small recalibration. Kepler's landing was a human colony, a small one. It sat far out on the edge of what the Empire considered frontier space. 8 months ago, a Veilthari fleet had conducted a pacification exercise in that region, a show of force aimed at a neutral species observing from a nearby system. Kepler's landing had been in the way, or rather, it had been useful. Bombing an undefended human settlement had been a simple way to demonstrate imperial capability to the watching neutrals. The order had been given by a junior admiral. The whole operation had taken less than 4 hours. It had not been deemed significant enough to include in the standard diplomatic briefing. Solvan had not thought about Kepler's landing at all. He thought about it now. That matter, he said carefully, falls outside the scope of today's discussion. Does it? Ilara said. She did not say it loudly. She said it the way a person says something when they already know the answer. The purpose of this meeting, Solvan continued, his voice returning to its comfortable authority, is to formalize the transfer of 3 colonial territories as outlined in the compliance notice. That is a separate matter from any prior operational activities in frontier space. Ilara looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her satchel and placed a single data chip on the table between them. She did not activate it. She left it sitting there, small and flat and quiet. I'll come back to that, she said. Solvan looked at the chip. Then he looked at her. He had conducted hundreds of these meetings. He had sat across from generals and kings and the elected leaders of entire civilizations, and every one of them had eventually given him what the Empire wanted. He was very good at reading the room. He was very good at reading people. He could not read Ilara Voss. Ambassador, he said, with a thin smile, I think you will find that cooperation, in the long run, is always the most practical choice for younger civilizations. Ilara nodded again. She folded her hands on the table. I'm sure you believe that, she said. Most people in your position do. She said it without anger, without sarcasm. She said it like a person stating a simple fact about the weather, something true, something mild, something that required no argument. Solvan studied her again. Something about her stillness bothered him in a way he could not name. In his experience, people who were outmatched showed it. They fidgeted. They over-explained. They apologized for taking up space. This woman had walked into the heart of the most powerful empire in the known galaxy, sat down in a chair that had been deliberately made small, and she looked like she was the most comfortable person in the room. He told himself it was simply poor social awareness, a young species, an inexperienced diplomat, nothing more. He told himself that, and he almost believed it. The morning before Kepler's landing was bombed, a girl named Mara had been late for school. Her mother had called her 3 times. She had finally come running out of the house, with one boot half-laced, her bag swinging off one shoulder, her breakfast still in her hand. She had waved to the neighbor's dog as she passed the fence. She had been 8 years old. She had been worried about being late because her class was going on a trip that day to the greenhouse fields outside town, and she didn't want to miss the transport. She never made it to school. Ilara Voss knew this story. She knew it because she had read every single file, every recovered record, every witness account gathered in the weeks after the attack. She had not done this as part of her job. She had done it because she believed that if you were going to speak for the dead, you owed it to them to know who they were. She did not tell Mara's story to the Veilthari lords that day. She told them numbers first. She picked up the data chip from the table and activated it. A soft blue display opened in the air above it, a map of the region around Kepler's landing, with the colony marked at its center. Around it, in clean red lines, were the paths of the Veilthari fleet. 4 hours and 17 minutes, Ilara said. That's how long the operation lasted. 4,300 people. The colony had no military installation, no weapons depot, no strategic value to anyone, It had farms. It had a school. It had a clinic with 2 doctors. She advanced the display. The map shifted to show casualty figures, building by building. Several of the Velthari lords looked at the display. A few looked away. One, a younger lord sitting near the far end of the table, whose name Alara had already memorized, leaned forward slightly, reading the numbers. The fleet did not distinguish between civilian and non-civilian structures, Alara continued. This was not an accident. The after-action report filed by the admiral in charge described the approach as a full-surface suppression pattern. That means they hit everything, systematically. High Arbiter Solvan let her speak. He had decided to let her finish because interrupting seemed unnecessary. She was laying out a grievance. Grievances were common in these meetings. Every species that had ever been brought into the Empire had some grievance. The key was to let them air it, acknowledge it in vague and diplomatic terms, and then return to the practical matter at hand. He had done this many times. The purpose of the attack, Alara said, was not to defeat us. You didn't need to defeat us. You wanted to make a point to the Drevhari observers in the neighboring system. We were used as a demonstration. She turned off the map of Kepler's landing. A new display replaced it, this one wider, showing not one colony, but dozens of marked locations, spread across a much larger region of space. This is what I want you to look at, she said. The map was dense with markers. Different colors for different species. The Velthari lords recognized some of the locations. Immediately old pacification operations, frontier demonstrations, compliance actions, going back decades. Every marker is a place where the Velthari Empire attacked a civilian population to make a point to someone else, Alara said. Not to win a war, not to stop an attack, just to send a message. I counted 61 separate incidents in the last 100 years alone. The chamber was quiet. Solvan kept his expression even. Internally, he was recalibrating more seriously now. This woman had done a significant amount of research. That was unexpected. Young civilizations didn't usually do this kind of homework. They came to these meetings with their own complaints and their own fear, not with 100 years of imperial history laid out in a map. You've been thorough, he said. It was a compliment that also served as a dismissal. Thorough people could still be dismissed. I had 8 months, Alara said simply. And what is the point of this history lesson, Ambassador? She looked at him. The point is that you don't remember any of these, she said. Not really. I can see it on your faces. Some of you didn't even know about Kepler's landing before today. To you, these are footnotes, administrative decisions, things that happened far away and required very little thought. She paused. 4,300 people. To you, that's a footnote. To us, that's a wound that doesn't close. The young lord at the far end of the table, Lord Kavrin, Alara, knew his name, knew he was considered a moderate within the council, spoke up quietly. What is it you're hoping to achieve today, Ambassador? If not negotiation, then what? It was the first honest question anyone had asked her. She looked at him for a moment. Something in her expression shifted, not softening exactly, but becoming more direct. I'll get to that, she said. But I want you to understand something first, not politically, not diplomatically. I want you to understand it as plain fact. She reached back into her satchel and set a small photograph on the table. It was printed on paper, an unusual thing to bring to an interstellar diplomatic meeting. It showed a colony street, simple buildings, a row of trees someone had planted along the road, a bicycle leaning against a wall. This was Kepler's landing, she said. 22,000 people lived there. Farmers, mostly. Engineers. Families who wanted space and quiet, and a chance to build something new. She left the photograph on the table. When the fleet came, they had no warning. There was no declaration, no ultimatum, no communication of any kind. The first bomb fell on the Eastern District at 6:14 inches the morning. Most people were still asleep. The ones who were awake had no time to run. Her voice was steady. She was not performing grief. She was delivering information. Of the 4,300 who died, over 900 were children. One of the Velthari lords coughed. Another moved a hand slightly on the table, a small, involuntary gesture. Solvan said, "As I noted earlier, this falls outside the—" "I know what you're going to say," Alara said. Not rudely, just factually. "You're going to say it falls outside the scope of today's discussion. And I understand why you want to say that. Because, if it's inside the scope of today's discussion, then today's discussion becomes much more complicated for you." She looked around the table slowly. Lord by lord. Advisor by advisor. "I'm not here to make you feel guilty," she said. "Guilt is not useful to me. I'm here because 4,300 people deserve more than a footnote in your administrative records. And because what happened to them tells me something important about how your empire operates." "And what does it tell you?" Solvan asked. His voice was careful now. Still composed, but careful. "It tells me you do this because no one has ever made it cost anything," she said. "You bomb civilian colonies because the civilizations you bomb are too small, too scared, or too broken to do anything about it. And so you keep doing it, and it keeps costing nothing." She set both her hands flat on the table. "I want you to understand, very clearly, that is about to change." The room was silent again, but it was a different silence now. Not the silence of a meeting that had paused. The silence of a room where something had shifted, and everyone present could feel it, even if they could not yet name what it was. High Arbiter Solvan looked at Alara Voss, and for the first time that day, he did not feel like the most powerful person at the table. He did not like that feeling. There is a thing that most powerful empires never bother to learn about the species they conquer. They learn population numbers. They learn resource outputs. They learn the names of leaders and the locations of military installations. They do not, as a rule, spend much time learning how a species thinks, how it processes loss, what it does with pain. If the Velthari Empire had spent more time studying human history, not the 11 years of interstellar history, but the long, deep, ugly history of humanity on its own world, they might have noticed a pattern, a very old pattern. It went something like this. Hurt humans badly enough, and they stop calculating whether they can win. They simply decide that they will. This was not courage in the way other species understood courage. Other species fought when they believed victory was possible. Humans fought when they had decided that not fighting was no longer acceptable. These were two completely different things. The Velthari had never encountered the second kind. Alara let the silence in the chamber sit for a moment. Then she spoke again. "When we got FTL 11 years ago," she said, "most of our government wanted to celebrate. And there was celebration. But there were also people who weren't celebrating. People who had been watching what the Velthari Empire does to new civilizations. People who had read the history of every species you've absorbed. And those people said something very unpopular at the time." She paused. They said, "We have perhaps a decade before the Empire notices us. We should use it." Lord Kavrin, who had asked the honest question earlier, was watching her closely now. "Uses it for what?" he asked. "Learning," Alara said. "Planning, building relationships, and understanding, very thoroughly, how your empire works, what it fears, what it respects, and what it consistently underestimates." She reached into her satchel again. This time she took out a second data chip. She placed it on the table, but did not activate it yet. "The Drevhari," she said. "You absorbed them 60 years ago. Your history describes them as a species that sued for peace after 3 engagements. What your history doesn't mention is that before they surrendered, they had identified every weakness in your fleet formation strategy. They just had no way to use that knowledge. They had no allies. They had no time. They gave up because they were alone." She let that sit. "The Solenti, 40 years ago. Same story. Brilliant engineers. They actually developed a countermeasure to your long-range targeting systems. They never deployed it because by the time it was ready, your fleets had already reached their home system. They had moved too slowly." Solvan's jaw was tight now. "You've been studying our military engagements." "We've been studying everything," Alara said. "For 8 years, 600 researchers, full-time. Historical records, tactical analyses, material science from debris fields your fleets left behind. We recovered a Valthari patrol cruiser that drifted into unclaimed space 7 years ago. Your report said it was destroyed in a navigational accident. It was not destroyed. We brought it in, took it apart piece by piece, and learned a great deal. The chamber was so quiet that the distant sound of the gas giant's storm outside the windows was almost audible. One of the military attachés near the wall had gone very still. His hand had moved slowly, carefully to a communication device at his belt. Alara watched him without looking directly at him. "Before anyone sends a signal," she said, in a calm, conversational tone, "I should mention that we anticipated that response. Any communication out of this room in the next 2 hours will be automatically rerouted. We've been running a low-frequency interference field since I sat down. It's very subtle. Your instruments probably haven't flagged it yet." Sulfan stood up. He was tall when he was seated. Standing, he was imposing the full authority of 3 centuries of imperial power gathered into one figure in violet robes. He placed both hands flat on the table and leaned forward. "Ambassador," he said, and his voice was no longer smooth and generous, "I would strongly advise you to consider what you are doing right now." Alara looked up at him. She did not lean back. She did not tense. She simply looked at him the same way she had looked at him since she walked in. "I am doing exactly what I came here to do," she said. "You are in the heart of the Valthari Empire. You are on an imperial station surrounded by imperial forces. Whatever you think you have prepared, I know where I am," she said. "Then you understand that this station alone carries enough firepower to—" "I know what this station carries," she said. "I have the full technical specifications. We've had them for about 3 years. Sulvan stopped speaking. The silence that followed was different from all the other silences. It was the silence of a man who had just picked up a rock to throw and discovered the rock was looking back at him. Alara reached out and activated the second data chip. A new display bloomed in the air. Not a map of history this time, but a live sensor feed. It showed the space around Corveth Prime. It showed the Imperial Station, and around the station, marked in 17 separate points in a precise geometric pattern around the planet's gravity well, were ships, human ships, running quiet, tucked into the sensor shadow of the gas giant's electromagnetic output, cold-launched from positions the Empire's observation posts hadn't been watching. Not a massive fleet, not enough ships to fight the Empire, but perfectly placed. Every one of them locked onto specific points of the station's structure. 17 ships, Alara said. Each one carrying a payload that our weapons engineers spent 4 years developing specifically to defeat Valthari hull plating. They have been in position for 6 days. They will remain in position until I leave this station, or until I fail to send a specific confirmation signal every 3 hours. Sulvan stared at the display. Around the table, the Council of Lords had broken from its careful composure. 2 of them were speaking quietly to each other. One had pushed his chair back slightly. The young Lord Kavran was staring at the sensor display with an expression that had moved past surprise into something closer to genuine thought. "You're bluffing," said one of the older lords, a heavy-set figure named Dorith who had said nothing until now. His voice was the certainty of a man who had never needed to bluff in his life because he had always had more power than the person across from him. Alara looked at him. "Contact your fleet command," she said. "Ask them to run a deep scan of the gravity shadow on the night side of Corveth Prime. Take your time." No one moved for a moment. Then Sulvan gave a small nod to one of the attachés, who worked quickly at a console near the wall. There was a pause of perhaps 40 seconds. The attaché looked up. His expression confirmed everything. Lord Dorith said nothing. He sank back very slightly in his chair. "You have to understand," Alara said, her voice still calm, still even, like someone explaining something to a student. "We are not a species that prepares for the fight we expect to have. We prepare for the fight we hope we never have to have. And then we prepare for the one after that." She looked around the table. "We have been working toward this conversation for 8 years. Every scenario, every response, every possible thing you might do in this room, we have planned for it. We are not here by accident. We are not improvising. She folded her hands. Now, she said, I believe Lord Caverin asked me a question. He asked what I was hoping to achieve today. She looked at the young lord directly. I'll answer that now, she said. But first, I want every person in this room to understand what they are actually looking at. Because you have been looking at this situation as though I am a small species asking a large empire for consideration. She paused. That is not what this is. Above the main floor of the conclave chamber, there was a gallery. It ran along 3 walls of the room, set back behind a low rail, with seats for observers from the Empire's client species. These were the small races absorbed civilizations that had been permitted to keep their representative councils as long as those councils never said anything that mattered. They came to conclave sessions as a formality. They watched. They took notes. They went home and filed reports that no one in the Empire ever read. Today, the gallery was full. Word had moved quickly through the station's corridors that something unusual was happening in the main chamber. Station workers, administrative staff, and the representatives of 7 client species had quietly found their way to the gallery seats. They were watching now, still, careful, not wanting to draw attention to themselves. They had seen many things in these chambers. They had seen civilizations sign away their independence. They had seen leaders accept terms with shaking hands. They had seen the Empire take what it wanted, calmly and efficiently, from species that had no means to say no. They had never seen anything like this. Elira Voss stood up. She had been seated for the entire meeting. She had been calm, measured, unhurried. She had taken the room apart piece by piece from a chair. Now she stood. And even though she was shorter than every Veilthari lord at the table, and even though she was alone, and even though she carried no weapon, something about the act of standing changed the quality of the air in the room. She reached into her satchel one final time and removed a single folded piece of paper. Not a data chip. Paper. She unfolded it, smoothed it flat on the table in front of her, and looked down at it for a moment. Then she looked up. I am going to read something, she said. I'd ask that you let me finish before anyone speaks. No one objected. She looked down at the paper. On behalf of the people of Earth, the colonies of human space, and the 14 allied peoples who stand with us today, I am delivering the following declaration to the Veilthari Empire. She paused. Then she continued. The Veilthari Empire has, over the course of 100 years, conducted 61 documented attacks on civilian populations across the known galaxy. These attacks were not acts of war. They were acts of convenience. They were carried out against peoples who could not defend themselves, against homes that had done nothing to invite destruction, against lives that were ended not out of necessity but out of habit, out of the unchallenged belief that power requires no justification. Her voice was clear and level. Not loud. Just steady. 8 months ago, the Empire bombed a human colony called Kepler's Landing. 4,300 people died. 912 of them were children. No warning was given. No declaration was made. No communication of any kind was extended before or after the attack. The colony was destroyed as a demonstration for an audience that was not even human. She looked up briefly. Every eye in the room, at the table, in the gallery was on her. We are here today to make the following clear. Any attack on a human world, any attack on any world under human protection, will be treated by the people of Earth and our allies as an attack on all of us. Our response will not be proportional. It will not be brief. It will not stop when it becomes inconvenient, or expensive, or difficult. If you come for one of our homes, you will have all of us, for as long as it takes. High Arbiter Solvan opened his mouth. She kept reading. We are aware that the Empire does not take this kind of statement seriously from young civilizations. We are aware that you have heard similar words before, from species that were ultimately unable to back them up. We want to be transparent about why we are different. She turned the page. Humans have a history. Not an interstellar history. A ground history. A long, difficult, often terrible history on a single world, where we fought each other for thousands of years before we ever looked at the stars. In that history, there are patterns. Empires rose and fell. Strong nations absorbed weaker ones. Peoples were displaced, conquered, erased. This was our history. We are not proud of all of it. She paused. But in that history, there is also something else. There were moments again and again, across thousands of years and dozens of cultures, when a people who had been beaten, outgunned, outmanned, and given every rational reason to surrender, simply did not. Not because they thought they could win, but because surrender felt worse than dying. Because some things, homes, families, the memory of who you are not things you can calculate a cost for. She turned to look at Solvan directly. You have never encountered a species like that. The ones who came close, the Drevari, the Salenti, were alone. They had no allies, no time, no history that told them they had survived worse. We are not alone. We have allies. We have time. And we have 4,000 years of recorded history that tells us, over and over, that the side that refuses to stop is almost always the side that eventually wins. Solvan's hands were flat on the table. His jaw was set. You are one small civilization threatening an empire that spans. I know what you span, she said. I know every system. I know every fleet position. I know the names of your admirals and the fuel consumption rates of your long-range carriers and the political disagreements inside your own high council that have been slowing your eastern expansion for the last decade. She folded the paper and set it down. You attacked our home, she said. Those are not political words. They are not a negotiating position. They are a fact. And facts have consequences. The gallery above was completely silent. Among the observer seats, a delegate from the Drevhari, the species the Empire had absorbed 60 years ago, the species that had been mentioned by name, was gripping the rail in front of her with both hands. Her eyes were wide. Her people had tried to resist. Once. They had failed. She had grown up being told that resistance was always futile, that the Empire was simply too large, too old, too deeply rooted to challenge. She was watching a human woman challenge it. Alone. Calmly. From a small chair. Solvan said, with great control. What do you want? The question hung in the air. It was not the question of a powerful man. It was the question of a man who had just realized that the meeting had not gone the way he planned, and who needed to find a new foothold. Elara looked at him. 3 things, she said. First, reparations for Kepler's landing. Full economic reparations for every family that lost someone. Calculated and paid within 1 standard year. She held up a second finger. Second, the Empire will withdraw its claim on all 3 colonial territories named in the compliance notice. Those worlds are not yours. They were never yours. Third finger, the name of the admiral who gave the order to bomb Kepler's landing, his full service record, delivered to us within 72 hours. D-men. Solvan stared at her. And if we refuse? Elara picked up her satchel and hung it over her shoulder. Then I walk out of this room, send the signal, and 17 ships become the most expensive footnote in Imperial history. She paused. And then the ones after those 17 ships come, and you will spend the next generation fighting a species that considers losing to be a temporary condition. She looked at him one last time. You have 72 hours to deliver the Admiral's name. The reparation and withdrawal terms will be formally transmitted within 6 hours of my departure. She pushed the paper across the table toward Solvan. That is a copy, she said. For your records. In the gallery above, the Drevhari delegate released the railing. Her hands were shaking. She looked at the woman standing below, who had just said, in plain language, in the heart of the Empire, the thing that her own people had never been able to say. You came for our home. That is not something we forget. That is not something we forgive. And it is not something we let go, unanswered. Slowly, the Drevhari delegate began to clap. 1 pair of hands. Then another. Then, from the gallery, a sound that the Velthari conclave chamber had never heard in 300 years of operation, the sound of the small and the absorbed and the overlooked, briefly, carefully, with great feeling, applauding. The Empire complied. It did not do so quickly. It did not do so graciously. It took 61 hours, 11 hours short of the deadline for the first formal communication to arrive from the imperial capital. The message was worded carefully, the way powerful things are worded when they are forced to say something they don't want to say. The language was bureaucratic and cold. There were no apologies. There was no acknowledgement that anything wrong had been done. There was only the information. The admiral's name was enclosed. The withdrawal from the 3 colonial territories would begin in 30 days, and a reparations figure would be formally negotiated through standard diplomatic channels. It was the language of a body that had been cornered and was now moving sideways to find space. But it was compliance. On Earth, in the offices of the diplomatic corps, people stood around screens and read the message in silence. Then someone started crying, quietly, and then someone else put a hand on their shoulder, and then the room became something between relief and grief, and the strange, exhausted feeling of a thing you worked toward for years, finally being real in front of you. The 17 ships returned from their positions around Corvette Prime. They came home slowly, because there was no longer any urgency, and the crews were tired. When the first ship came into dock, a small group of people gathered at the landing platform. There was no ceremony. Someone had brought food. People hugged each other. Someone said, "Thank you," and someone else said, "Don't thank me yet," and someone else said, "Why not? This is good." And the first person said, "Yes, it's good, but it's also just the beginning," and they were all right. A Lara Voss flew home commercial. She sat in a window seat and looked at the stars for most of the journey. She slept for 4 hours, which was more than she had slept in several days. When she landed, a small group of journalists was waiting. She answered 2 questions, said she was tired, and went home. She did not give a speech. She did not hold a press conference. She had said what she needed to say, and she had said it to the people who needed to hear it, and she felt no particular need to say it again for cameras. On Kepler's landing, a man named Torres, who had lost his wife and youngest daughter in the attack, sat on the steps of a partially rebuilt building and heard the news from his brother over a radio. He didn't say anything for a long time. His brother, on the other end of the line, didn't say anything either. They just sat with it. After a while, Torres said, "Good." His brother said, "Yeah." And they hung up. It was not justice. Everyone knew it was not justice. The reparations were money, and money was not his wife. The admiral's name was information, and information was not his daughter. But something had been said that needed to be said, and something had been done that had never been done before. And the world, all the worlds, human and otherwise, were slightly different than they had been 72 hours ago. It was not justice, but it was something. Across the galaxy, in systems that the Velthari Empire had governed for decades, things began to stir. The Drevhari delegate, who had started the applause in the gallery, returned to her home system and gave a long speech to her council. She told them what she had seen. She told them about the human woman with the small satchel and the paper and the calm voice. She told them about the 17 ships in the gravity shadow. She told them what had been said, and how it had been received, and what the Empire had done afterward. Her council listened in silence. When she finished, the oldest member of the council, a man who had been alive when the Drevhari surrendered, who had been a child watching the fleet come in, said, "We moved too slowly. We were alone." And the delegate said, "We aren't alone anymore." In other systems, in other languages, similar conversations were happening, not loudly, not yet. But they were happening. The Velthari Empire was not destroyed. It was not broken or dissolved. It was still enormous and old and powerful, and it would remain so for a long time. But something had happened to it that was hard to name and harder to reverse. It had been made to feel, for the first time in 300 years, that there were consequences, that there was a line somewhere that, if crossed, would be answered. That somewhere in the galaxy, there was a species that did not do the mathematics of survival the way everyone else did. High Arbiter Solvan filed his private report to the Emperor 3 days after the conclave. He was a careful writer, formal, precise, built from decades of diplomatic language. His reports were usually models of measured prose. This one was different. It was still formal, still careful, but anyone who knew Solvan could see that something in it was different. It was the report of a man who had been shaken and was trying not to show it, and was not entirely succeeding. The final lines of the report were quoted widely later. After the document was leaked, no one ever discovered who leaked it, and they became, in time, something close to famous. He had written, "They are not the strongest species we have encountered. They do not have the oldest civilization, or the largest fleet, or the most advanced technology. But they carry something inside them that I have no word for in our language. They believe, without apparent doubt, that their home is worth more than their lives. Not as a philosophy, not as a slogan, as a simple working fact that they act on without hesitation. I have spent my career negotiating with civilizations that wanted to survive. These people are different. They do not want to survive. They want to win. And they are willing to wait as long as it takes. I recommend we do not give them a reason to start counting." The report was noted at the imperial level and filed away. The emperor made no public statement. He was old and careful, and he had seen many things, and he understood, in the way that old careful people sometimes do, that some situations are not best responded to loudly. He told his senior advisors to update the empire's classification of humanity from minor emerging civilization, low priority, to something new, a category that had only ever been applied to 3 other species in imperial history. The new category was called civilizations requiring long-term strategic consideration. It was not a compliment, exactly, but it was a recognition. On Kepler's landing, 6 months after the conclave, the rebuilding was well underway. New buildings were rising. The greenhouse fields on the east side of the colony, the ones the children had been going to visit on the day the bombs came, had been replanted. They were green and tall and moving gently in the wind of the colony's mild summer. Alara came back without announcement. She walked through the construction with no security, no staff, no title visible. She was just a woman in ordinary clothes, walking through a place that was slowly becoming itself again. People recognized her here and there. They nodded to her. A few shook her hand. One old man said thank you, and she said, "I'm sorry it took so long." And they both knew neither of those things was enough, and they both said them anyway, because they were true. Near the eastern edge of the colony, at the edge of the rebuilt greenhouse field, a group of children were playing. They had the careless noise of children everywhere, running and calling to each other and laughing at things that made no sense to adults. One of them spotted Alara and stopped running. She walked over. She crouched down so she was at eye level, the way you do with children when you want them to know you're talking to them and not over them. "Are you the one who went to the Empire?" the child asked. "Yes," Alara said. "Were you scared?" She looked at the child for a moment. Then she looked at the new buildings rising behind the child, and the green field behind those, and the sky beyond that, the same sky, the same stars, the same quiet world being put back together by people who had refused to accept that it was gone. "Every second," she said. The child thought about that. "But you went anyway," the child said. Alara stood up. She looked out at the field. "That's the whole thing," she said quietly. "That's always been the whole thing." She put her hands in her pockets and kept walking, and the children went back to playing, and the colony went on, rebuilding itself, and somewhere far away in the heart of an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 300 years, a report sat in a file that said, "Do not give them a reason to start counting." And somewhere, in the quiet spaces between stars, 14 allied peoples who had once been told they were small and broken, and finished looked up at the same sky and thought, for the first time in a long time, that perhaps they were none of those things.